Breaking news here on CBS Sports HQ, and it is bad news for Tennessee Titans fans and fantasy players who have Julio Jones or A.J. Brown on their teams. Both receivers ruled out for this week's game against the New York Jets. Brown strained his hamstring during Tennessee's win over the Colts. Jones did the same. He didn't appear in the fourth quarter after also injuring his hamstring. The two have combined to catch 19 passes for 296 yards for the Titans this season. And for more, let's now welcome in senior fantasy football analyst Jamey Eisenberg. Jamey, we knew that this was a possibility/probability for this team going into this week. So who's next up for the Titans pass catchers as they face the Jets?
Well, if I were the Titans, I would just say, hey, let's just go run the option, make that big 22 behind us lead the way, which is probably going to be the case anyway, whether he's running the option or not. So expect a lot of Derrick Henry. But Nick Westbrook is the first receiver I would go look at. Chester Rogers, both those guys scored touchdowns last week. We'll find out if they're able to get Josh Reynolds on the field. He's been inactive to start the season. So those are the two that I would think are going to be the most prominent options. Westbrook's somebody that I picked up in some deeper leagues just with the hope that he's going to see some targets. But for the Titans and Mike Vrabel, you know what they'll do. They'll just try and run the ball as much as they can. Not necessarily have to make Ryan Tannehill make plays, but he got touchdowns out of these guys last week. I wouldn't be surprised if he found some production out of them this week as well.
So with these two out and looking at guys like Westbrook and Reynolds, how confident are you if Ryan Tannehill is your quarterback and having to start him this week?
Yeah, I have him in a couple leagues also. I'd be looking for alternative plays. Taylor Heinicke would be the first place I'd go look because he's available almost everywhere. He's going to run a little bit. He's been 23 or more fantasy points each of the last 2 weeks. Jacoby Brissett, somebody you could pivot to. The Colts defense has struggled. You get a little revenge game factor for the former Indianapolis quarterback with the Dolphins. Sam Darnold, if he's out there, clearly would have an opportunity to play well. People have given up on Matt Ryan. So there are quarterbacks. That's a nice thing. The position is so deep. You can find somebody to start this week. But, yeah, Tannehill will be somebody I'd be looking to get away from.
Okay, so A.J. Brown is a guy that I have on one of my teams, Jamey, so I'm obviously going to need to go to the waiver wire this week to look at replacing him or Jones if you're another owner who has him. So who should I be looking at?
Yeah, again, if you're staying in Tennessee, Westbrook would be my favorite, but I like Olamide Zaccheaus for the Falcons. They're facing a Washington football defense that has been bad, number one in terms of fantasy points allowed to number one in terms of opposing quarterbacks, number two in terms of opposing wide receivers. So he's got a touchdown last week, 6 targets. Deshaun Jackson in a potential shootout with the Cardinals. You saw him score last week, so maybe getting on the same page with Matthew Stafford. Terrace Marshall can maybe have an uptick in targets without Dan Arnold there. KJ Osborne had 2 good games in the first 3. Hopefully he steps up and plays well. And then you're looking at Colin Johnson for the Giants. Let's not forget the Giants are now down 2 receivers also. They don't have Sterling Shepard or Darius Slayton, so maybe we see a little Kadarius Toney. But Colin Johnson, 7 targets, 5 catches last week. I hate the matchup against the Saints, but desperate times call for desperate measures, so maybe Daniel Jones leans on those 2 guys.
A little bit of work to do this afternoon. He is CBS Sports senior fantasy football analyst Jamey Eisenberg joining us to discuss the Tennessee Titans as they enter their game against the Jets without A.J. Brown and Julio Jones. Thanks, Jamey. And, of course, for more fantasy football talk, you can get Fantasy Football Today in 5. Jamey and the fellas breaking stuff down every single day for you in 5 minutes. Everything you need to know you can download and subscribe wherever you get your preferred podcasts.
Want more of the Fantasy Football Today podcast and nonstop year-round fantasy advice? It's simple. Hit the subscribe button and hang with us all throughout the year.